There were 14 ice cubes in the tray Rosa Alvarez pulled from the freezer that Tuesday morning, and by the time she was finished, one of them held something no ice cube was ever supposed to hold. 4 words, written in pencil on a strip of paper no wider than her thumb, sealed inside frozen water and waiting for a man who had no idea his own kitchen to just become the last line of defense between him and something he could not yet imagine. Rosa did not know, sliding the tray back into the freezer with hands that would not stop shaking, whether what she'd just done would save a life or cost her the only job keeping her family fed. She only knew that she had made this exact choice once before, years earlier, in a different country, in a different kitchen, and that the silence she'd chosen then had cost her a brother she still dreamed about. She was not going to make that choice twice. Rosa had worked as a housekeeper for the Cross family for 3 years, a job she'd taken because it paid well and required exactly the kind of invisible competence she had spent her adult life perfecting: the ability to move through a house, manage its rhythms, and be in the specific way household staff in properties like this one are trained to be, almost entirely unnoticed. She was 39 years old, a widow, mother to 2 teenagers she supported alone since her husband's death 6 years earlier. And she had built her entire professional reputation on discretion, the quiet understanding that whatever she saw or heard inside, the walls of a house like the Cross estate stayed inside those walls. It was a reputation that had served her well for 3 years. It was about to be tested in a way no employer handbook had prepared her for. Before we continue, if you believe that kindness has no rank and grace wears no uniform, please like this video, subscribe to The Overlooked, and share this with someone who needs to believe in people again today. Nathaniel Cross was 51 years old, the founder of a logistics technology company that had made him, over 2 decades, extraordinarily wealthy, and a man whose marriage to his second wife, Vivian, 38, had been for the better part of the last year, quietly disintegrating in ways Nathaniel himself had not fully allowed himself to see. He traveled constantly. He worked 80-hour weeks, he told himself, were temporary, and had somehow lasted 6 years. He had, in the specific way successful men sometimes do, mistaken a marriage that was drifting apart for a marriage that was simply busy, and had not noticed because he was rarely home long enough to notice that Vivian had, over the preceding 8 months, begun spending a significant amount of time with the family's financial advisor, a man named Grant Whitfield. In meetings that had started as legitimate estate planning sessions and evolved, gradually, into something considerably darker, Rosa had overheard the first fragment of it 3 weeks earlier, cleaning the hallway outside Vivian's private study while Vivian believed the door was fully closed. It hadn't been. Rosa had caught only pieces that day, a mention of a life insurance policy, a comment about timing, a laugh that didn't sound like it belonged to the conversation it was attached to, and had told herself, the way people tell themselves things they aren't ready to fully believe, that she'd misunderstood. That rich people talked about money in ways that sounded strange to someone who'd grown up without much of it. That it was none of her business regardless. She had not been able to hold on to that explanation for long. Over the following weeks, cleaning rooms, she was technically not eavesdropping in, but simply doing her job inside of. Rosa pieced together, fragment by fragment, a picture that had stopped resembling an innocent misunderstanding days ago. Vivian and Grant were involved romantically, which was its own quiet tragedy, but not on its own anything Rosa felt obligated to intervene in. What made her stomach turn cold? What made her start double-checking the locks on her own thoughts at night? Was the conversation she overheard 9 days before the ice cube, in which Vivian, her voice flat and businesslike in a way that chilled Rosa more than any raised voice could have, discussed with Grant the exact dosage and timing required to trigger a fatal cardiac event in a man with Nathaniel's specific, largely unpublicized heart condition, a condition Rosa herself had learned only because she managed his medication schedule as part of her household duties, filling his weekly pill organizer every Sunday evening, one of 100 small invisible tasks nobody else in that house paid attention to. The dark part of this story is the 9 days that followed that conversation, during which Rosa said nothing to anyone, paralyzed by a fear that was entirely reasonable and entirely unbearable at the same time. She was undocumented. Her employment with the Cross family, arranged years earlier through a placement agency that had never fully verified her paperwork and had, over time, come to depend on her reliability enough not to ask further questions, was the single thread holding her family's entire life together: her son's community college tuition, daughter's asthma medication, the small rented house 2 towns over that she had furnished piece by piece over 3 years of careful saving. If she went to Nathaniel directly and was wrong or was right but not believed, Vivian's fury alone could end her employment, and with it, everything Rosa had built. If she went to the police, an undocumented woman making an accusation against her wealthy employer's wife, she understood with the specific bitter clarity of someone who has learned this lesson before, exactly how quickly the situation could be turned around to target her instead. And underneath all of that calculation sat the older wound. The one she carried from a country and a decade ago, when her younger brother Matteo had confided in her that a man in their neighborhood had threatened him. And Rosa, then 19, and frightened of the same kind of retaliation, had told him to stay quiet, to avoid the man, to let it pass advice that had felt safe and had turned out, 3 weeks later, to be the worst thing she ever told anyone, because Matteo had not survived what came next. And Rosa had spent every year since learning to live inside a guilt that never fully released its grip. She was not going to make Nathaniel Cross's silence her fault, too, but she also could not simply walk up to a billionaire and accuse his wife of planning his murder. Not with the specific evidence she had, not with everything she stood to lose if she was wrong about any piece of what she'd overheard. So she did the only thing that felt survivable. She wrote 4 words on a small strip of paper. Words that would mean nothing to anyone who found it by accident and everything to a man. Paying careful attention, check your heart medication. And she folded it small enough to fit inside an ice cube tray. Filled the tray with water and froze it into the compartment she knew. From 3 years of managing his kitchen habits, that Nathaniel used almost every single evening for the 1 glass of scotch he allowed himself after a long day. Always with exactly 2 cubes of ice, always from the same tray. A ritual so consistent Rosa could have set a clock by it, she reasoned. Lying awake that night, turning the decision over and over, that if he found it and thought it strange, he might dismiss it as nothing. But if some part of him took it seriously enough to actually look closely at his medication, the doses Vivian had. Rosa now understood with sick clarity, likely already begun subtly adjusting over recent weeks. It might be enough. It was not a confession. It was not an accusation with her name attached to it. It was the smallest possible warning she could give without exposing herself to the exact retaliation that it had. Cost her brother his life the last time she'd been too afraid to speak. Clearly, Nathaniel Cross found the note for evenings later, on a Saturday, pouring his usual scotch after an exhausting week, when the ice cube holding the paper cracked unevenly in his glass and released its contents into the amber liquid.
Ow.
Before he'd taken his first sip, he fished the small waterlogged strip out with 2 fingers, irritated at first, assuming some kind of kitchen mishap, and unfolded it, expecting nothing, reading the words "check your heart medication" in handwriting he didn't recognize. In a household where exactly 4 people had access to his kitchen, and only one of them had any reason to know the specifics of his private medical situation, something in Nathaniel Cross went very still. He did not go to Vivian immediately. He had spent 20 years building a company by trusting his instincts about when something felt wrong before he had proof of exactly what, and every instinct he had was now telling him, with a certainty that frightened him more than he wanted to admit, that this note was not a prank. He drove the next morning to his cardiologist's office without an appointment, insisted on an emergency review of his prescription records, and learned, within the hour, that his most recent refill, picked up not by him but by Vivian, who had offered months earlier to handle his pharmacy runs as a small act of wifely care that he had accepted gratefully at the time, contained a dosage variance from what his chart specified, subtle enough that it might have taken months to produce a fatal result, gradual enough to look on paper like a natural progression of his existing condition rather than anything deliberate. He said nothing to Vivian that day or the next. moving through his own home with the specific controlled calm of a man who has just discovered the floor beneath him was never as solid as he believed. Quietly hiring a private investigator instead of confronting anyone directly. A decision that within 2 weeks produced financial records, phone logs, and a life insurance policy increase filed 11 months earlier that made the shape of what had almost happened to him entirely sickeningly clear. What followed was not dramatic in the way television makes betrayal dramatic. No shouting confrontation, no public scene. Nathaniel consulted attorneys, quietly restructured his estate, and eventually, working with law enforcement who took the evidence seriously once it was fully assembled, saw Vivian and Grant Whitfield both arrested on conspiracy charges that would occupy the courts for the better part of a year. Throughout all of it, he told almost no one in the house what had actually happened, protecting, without fully understanding yet why it mattered so much to him, the privacy of whoever had left him that note. He found Rosa on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after the ice cube, in the kitchen where the whole warning had begun, and said, without preamble, in a voice that had lost the composed professional distance he usually kept with household staff, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to know that whatever the true answer is, you are not in any danger by telling me." Rosa's hands had gone still on the counter. "She said nothing," Nathaniel said. "The ice tray, the note. I've had 3 weeks to think about who has access to my kitchen, who manages my medication schedule, and who would have any reason to know what I needed to hear without being willing to say it to my face." He paused. "I think it was you. I need to know if I'm right, and I need you to understand that I am asking because I want to thank you. Not because you're in trouble." Rosa was quiet for a long moment, the old fear rising in her chest exactly the way it had for 9 sleepless nights. Before something in Nathaniel's face, not the face of an employer assessing a liability, but the face of a man who had nearly died and knew it, allowed her to finally set the fear down. She said, "It was me. I'm sorry I didn't tell you directly. I was scared of what would happen to me if I was wrong, or if she found out I'd said something." Nathaniel said, "You weren't wrong." Rosa said quietly, "I know. I heard enough to know." He asked her, then gently, why she'd chosen the method she had, the ice, the anonymity, the indirection, instead of simply telling him outright. And Rosa, for the first time in the 3 years she'd worked in his house, told him about Mateo. About 19 and afraid and staying quiet when speaking up might have saved him. About the promise she'd made to herself in the years since that she would never again let fear talk her into silence when someone's life might depend on her not staying quiet. Even if the form that courage took had to be small enough, indirect enough, to survive her own fear alongside it. Nathaniel listened without interrupting. The way a man listens when he finally understands the true size of what someone risked for him. When she finished, he said, "You saved my life without any guarantee I'd believe you. Without any protection if I turned out to be the kind of man who'd have punished you for it. I don't know how to properly thank someone for that," Rosa said. "You don't owe me anything. I did what I couldn't not do." Nathaniel said, "I disagree. And I'd like to start by making sure you never again have to be afraid of losing everything because you told the truth," he arranged over the following months. For an immigration attorney to help Rosa pursue legal status through a visa category, it's available to crime victims who assist in active investigations. A process that took the better part of a year, but that Nathaniel funded and supported at every step. Alongside a trust established for her children's education that he insisted over her repeated protests. Was not charity, but simply what was owed to the person who had quite literally saved his life with 4 words, frozen into an ice cube. On the day Rosa's legal status was finally confirmed, she stood in the same kitchen where it had all begun. And Nathaniel, uncharacteristically emotional, said, "I keep thinking about how icily I could have thrown that ice cube away without ever reading what was inside it."
Ow!
Rosa said, "I thought about that every night for 4 days. I decided it was still better than staying silent again." If this story moved you, please like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to Kindness Tales for more stories of courage, grace, and the small human moments that change everything. And tell us in the comments, has fear ever almost kept you from speaking up about something that truly mattered?